My man! Welcome to the show. How are you? Really excited as a parent and as a person of color to have our guest today. Hey, what's up, everybody? Hey guys, what's up? It's Irfan with the SunnySide podcast. Today, I'm excited to introduce our next guest. Her name is Mackenzie Hazen out of Denver, Colorado. She is CEO of Dais Media, and we're going to get into a lot of topics that are near and dear to my heart, specifically when it comes to personal branding for C-level executives and so forth. So, Mackenzie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks, Irfan. It's really great to be here.
So can you give first Dais Media, where does that name come from? I just learned how to say it, but I have no idea what it means. Can you sort of explain where the name came from and why you named your company that?
Absolutely. So I was unfamiliar with the word Dais also, but my roommate from college, who's getting her PhD in psychology, I was really struggling with what to name my company, and I told her I would give her $1,000 or something if she could come up with the name that I could get a domain for and whatever by the end of this girls' weekend that we did. So she actually came up with the name, cannot take credit for it. But a dais is a low platform or lectern. It's a seat of honor. You would often see it at maybe a college or university where someone's giving an intimate talk on to a group of select students who are really interested in a particular topic. So I love the intimate nature of, that idea of this small, intimate group of people all really interested in the same concept or idea, learning about something, talking about something. It's accessible, but it is still elevating you a little bit above the hoi poi.
It's very consistent with what Dais means. It's very simple, it's very elegant, it's very thoughtful, it's very intentional. So the minute I saw it, I was like, dude, I need to talk to Mackenzie. I need to find out what makes her tick and a little bit about why she decided to spend a large majority of her time pursuing this particular niche. Would you call it marketing? Would you call it branding? What would you call it?
That's a great question. I think I wouldn't call it marketing, but I think the world probably would. It's some kind of mix between marketing and public relations, but I'm happy to exist outside of a very clearly defined box. It makes some things easier and some things harder. And thank you so much for the compliment, because I actually designed and built it. I have no experience doing any of that. So it was like a 3-month endeavor. I was like, oh, I'll just do it real quick. It'll just take me a week or two. 3.5 months later, I had something that I wasn't even happy with, but I do appreciate it.
Interesting. Very, very cool. I just think it's so consistent with everything else that you've shared with me about how you approach your clients and the work that you do. Now, I know that you've got a little bit of a background in writing and so forth. Big surprise there. Talk to me a little bit about a background in mathematics and natural sciences, rather. How do you go from that to what you do now? Can you sort of explain to me and break down that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I wanted to be a scientist for always. And when I was finally a scientist, quote unquote, doing dendroclimatology research in Central America. So we were using instrumental climate data, right? Like a thermometer that tells you the temperature, and using that and correlating it to tree ring growth in a high elevation stand of trees in Guatemala. The reason that's cool is because you can't so tree rings form a ring every year, but in tropical regions of the world, they don't do that because the growing season doesn't stop. So being able to create this climate record for before we had data, right? So this is going back over 300 years, and having a pretty good guess at what the climate, precipitation, temperature looked like 300 years ago in tropical areas of the globe gives us better, more granular information about what it looks like worldwide, right? Because climate is driven at tropical regions and the poles, not necessarily in the temperate regions where we have the most data. Anyways, I spent a couple of years on and off in Guatemala doing dendroclimatology research. And I don't know if you've ever been to Guatemala, it tugged at my heartstrings seeing starving kids, seeing a lot of the environmental injustice, social injustice. And I realized that, I was the most junior person on this research team, right? I was working with postdoctoral researchers, and I was often called on or asked to be the person to give the presentation to a group of students, even though I was the most junior scientist, because I'm a pretty good communicator. And I was really good at translating the information that we were studying into something that was accessible for students, for policymakers, for whomever. And I realized that that was so much more important to me to be able to take and bridge the divide between what we know, right, from a science perspective, and what we do about it. And so that's really what inspired me to start working in government. And then I don't know if anyone who has ever worked in government knows that that's not really the place you go to get things done. You really need to be on the outside. And so that's when I started working for startups, and that was the pace at which I felt like I was getting shit done. And so I did data visualization for a consultancy for a startup, and that led me to sales and more of the translation piece of how do we communicate this stuff. And ultimately, now I'm helping a lot of different CEOs and a lot of different industries and verticals translate their great work, their messages to the masses.
That's so interesting, and it makes so much more sense as to why I felt this sort of affinity to you. Let me break that down for just a moment. So there are a lot of writers, there are a lot of digital marketers with varying degrees of experience. And the individuals that I've had the opportunity to work with early in my career, I had, you could say, a strong sense of frustration. Obviously, I'm not going to name any names, but when you have only a writing or journalism background by itself without additional context, you cannot bring insight to stories. You cannot bring relevance to stories. You cannot bring impact to stories. However, if you've done sales, if you've done product management, if you've done some of these other things where you're exposed, doing the grunt work, that's really what allows you to draw on and create insights. So when you are speaking to a C-level executive, you can make these sort of connections and okay, this is why it makes sense, or that's why it makes sense. And so, when we were publishing stories and getting our clients Inc. and USA Today or Forbes or some of these different publications, I was relying on third-party writers to create those stories. The depth wasn't there. And I think it's precisely because they lack the experience that you bring to the table. So that's really, really interesting. Would you agree that that's sort of why your clients choose you, is because you bring that sort of depth and insight, and you can take what they say and put it into a story that creates an impact, or is that simplifying things?
Well, I don't know about initially choosing to work with us, but certainly the clients I've worked with for 3, 4, 5 years now, that's absolutely why they've been working with me for so long. It's really important. We're telling personal stories, like the personal side of business to some extent. And I don't mean like a selfie on LinkedIn and like a story about your toddler. I mean, how I built this, right? The behind the scenes. I was describing this yesterday actually to someone, and it's like, okay, what a company should be posting on social media is the book report, right? It's like, okay, we studied all of the elements of, or a lab report, right? We studied all of the elements of why this thing works or why it doesn't work. And it's a little bit more academic, buttoned up, formal in terms of the tone. And then what the CEO should be sharing, right, is not resharing that post, but how they would call and tell their spouse about it, or how they would describe it to maybe their 12 or 15-year-old kid. It's like, tell me what you did. What did you do, dad? Like, and getting them to get out of the like formal, like, here's all the bullet points and all the important aspects of this, and more so like, how'd you come up with this idea? And, or, what's the most exciting part about this? What is the thing about this that means something to you? And so showing a little bit of behind the curtains, behind the scenes, something that makes people feel an emotional attachment to something that would otherwise be very academic in nature. And both are important, and neither are bad or wrong, right? It's just, how do we tell the story, or approach work from a different angle, lens, perspective?
And I think, as social media becomes our source of information and where we decide if the person on the other side of the screen is credible and trustworthy, and whether or not we want to work with them, it's their ability to tell that story in a human way, in a way that makes them seem relatable and empathetic, and all the things that we like to see in somebody we want to work with, we want to be friends with, we want to refer out to other folks that we work with. Hey, this person's great to work with, etc. And historically, many CEOs don't have a good resource to do that. It's usually sometimes their comms team, and it's sort of like an afterthought, right? When you interview a potential client, what do you look for to determine whether or not you'll be able to tell their story, or whether they'll be able to give you what you need to tell a story in a way that you think would make the most sense?
Yeah. And I love what you said, because it's so true, right? It's like the marketing team at your company has put so much work into producing whatever the thing is, right? A report or a white paper or whatever. And then it's like, okay, we finally did it. Now everyone go share it on social media. And it's like very much this afterthought, like, the distribution aspect of it through unofficial channels, if you will, is, yeah, very much an afterthought, but that's how we share information, and that's what gets people excited about information, right? So, it's not that your comms or marketing team is dropping the ball, though. I want to be really clear on that, because it takes a very different set of skills. And quite frankly, I think it's very hard for an internal marketing team to do well, because there takes a level of vulnerability on the CEO's part that's not comfortable. Like, right, if this is your direct report, or even if they're, a person removed from you, like, you don't feel like you can show, you're putting on a little bit of a show for your employees, right? Like, you need to be this source of inspiration and confidence. And so I think the thing that the CEOs that we work with, that they really value, is that it's one of the few, if not only, places where they can be 100% open, honest about whatever it is that's going on, and not worry that, now their employees worried about the future of the company, or if there's going to be layoffs, or, whatever. I often know the inside scoop secrets of a company before anyone else at that organization. And so having that level of, that like separation, I think is really important, because I do ask for these CEOs to show up, be 100% open, honest, vulnerable about whatever's going on. And through that, we're able to actually capture the heart of the message, right? I really try to focus on, we're not trying to create anything. We're just trying to document what you're already doing and saying. Every CEO I meet, like, they're already inspiring people with, they're inspiring their team, they're inspiring their clients, they're having all of these things. And even if they don't realize it, because they're not like thinking about it like that, it's not about creating something, it's about documenting your journey. And so when I think about like what makes someone a good candidate to work with us, that first and foremost, I just think that people that are reflective, who are willing to be a little bit vulnerable, is so important. But the main things that I really look for is this person already out there talking, interviewing, do they have a podcast? Are they presenting at conferences? Are they already doing some of these thought leadership things that basically just indicate they're interested in it, right? They're interested in doing the reflection. They're interested in thinking critically about things in a way that's maybe a little bit different than just the day to day. And outside of that, I think, some of it is learned, right? Like, the first couple of meetings, obviously people don't trust me as much. They don't trust the process as much. And so, we really look for people who want to make a long-term investment in building their thought leadership on LinkedIn. And, yeah, I think it really just does take a willingness and an openness to trust the process. The people who fail come in and are like, I need this, I need that, like, I want to do it like this, and try and control the process and can't kind of let go a little bit. And there are lots of CEOs like that. I get it. It's hard. I'm a control freak too, but trusting the process is really important.
There's a fair amount to unpack there. So you go in almost as a biographer, or dare I say, therapist in some cases, or that's sometimes, how the appointment might unfold. Do you set some sort of ground rules like, hey, this is my process, this is how things are going to go? Or is it just much more conversational and you show up with a notepad and say, tell me about yourself. How was your day today? Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like, because I can imagine that in some cases, somebody in the C-suite sees you walk in, or whether it's Zoom or what have you, they might say, gosh, do I really want to do this? I don't know how comfortable I am being vulnerable, telling my story. Now, certainly they have their worldview, and you've got some folks that you give them an opportunity to just speak for 5 minutes and they will open up their whole life story to you. How do you balance that and make sure that you get what you need without going way over scope, for example, right?
Yeah, totally fair. And, certainly there are parameters. We have a process for the first meeting or two, especially, where it's a very clear set of questions that we're working through to determine our goals. And so that provides some structure, framework for those conversations going forward. We have basically content pillars that kind of help to guide the conversation a bit. But I do genuinely, so first of all, we ask CEOs to just take note of either questions they're being asked throughout the week or little ideas that pop into their head that they're excited about. So best case scenario, I have 2 or 3 questions that are in alignment with the goals that we're trying to achieve. And a client is coming to that meeting with 3 or 4 bullet points of questions that came up or things they've been thinking about this week, right? It's about documenting what's going on, not necessarily curating some image. And so that's best case scenario. Now, do they always do it? No. But I do often start interviews just with what's top of mind for you this week, because I don't want to, jump into this set of questions and like lead people down some hole if there's already at the forefront of their mind this question that's come up 3 or 4 times, or this thing that they really want to get off their chest. And I do think about it like, I've had several clients who have business coaches who have either stopped working with a business coach, or like, it's not a perfect one-to-one, right? I'm not really like, for the most part, I'm not coaching people on their business, but simply by posing the right questions, right, and challenging people to think about things at maybe a deeper level, you do, right? Because really, when you think about coaching or therapy, like at the heart of it, it's not about the other person telling you what you should be doing. It just creates the space or the structure for you to think through what's going on and make decisions. So it does serve that purpose for some people. We're not talking about personal stuff almost ever. Like, sure, I'll ask like how your family vacation was, but it's not like, there's no personal therapy happening. But business therapy or business coaching, certainly I think there's a lot of overlap there. The hardest part about creating content, putting content out consistently, is just creating the space to think. Like the hardest part of going to the gym is making time to work, making time to go, right? So I think by having these standing meetings on people's calendars, by giving people that structure and time to show up and think critically about questions about their business, that's powerful in and of itself. I actually have 1 or 2 clients I've worked with for a long time who, like, yeah, we still create some content for them from time to time, but like they get value out of these meetings simply because it, again, creates space for them to think critically about what's going on in their business. So I'm not sure if I just answered anything that you asked me, but
No, I think you did. I talked a little bit about the process and whether or not you would see it as therapy versus coaching or somewhere in between. One of the most challenging parts is how do you demonstrate value, right? So when you come into so first off, how do you get your clients? Is it mostly referral? How do they find you? What conversations are they having where they're like, dude, we need to get Mackenzie Hazen on the phone like stat?
Irfan, did you ever use Clubhouse?
Yeah, for
It,
the 3 minutes, it was a big deal.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. In 2020. So in 2021, I believe, the first 6 months of 2021, exactly when you're talking about, which is like when everyone was on Clubhouse, this new audio only social media app launches. It's like a wait list. You have to know someone to get in. They create this insane buzz about it. And then, yeah, it fell off the face of the earth around the middle of 2021. But for 6 months, I hosted a daily, like every single day show on Clubhouse called the LinkedIn Club. And I literally joined Clubhouse, started a room one day, and then did it every single day and just kind of naturally attracted, 4 or 5 other regular moderators who were basically co-owners of the show with me. And that was how I met a handful of my initial clients. But yeah, now it's a lot of referrals. Obviously, my clients are very visible on LinkedIn, and people in their social networks are like, oh my God, Ryan, you went from never posting to like now you're like the celebrity on LinkedIn. How did you do it? And they're like, here you go. So there, there is a little bit of a benefit to that, just that it is such a social platform and it is highly visible. So that's probably the primary way. Recently I've had some larger companies working with us for employment, like to build up their employer brand,
Yep.
which really love. So other folks have actually found me on TikTok and introduced their CEO to us. Similarly, like I honestly get anxiety personally about posting on LinkedIn. I posted on LinkedIn every day for like a year or two, a couple years back. But now when I post on LinkedIn, I get so many messages and it's just really overwhelming for me, quite frankly. I'd rather be on like the newer platform, like on TikTok when I post, like no one gives a shit, no one cares until someone does. But so yeah, it's people who either want to grow visibility for their business from a revenue standpoint, but increasingly it's people who just want to attract great talent to their organization. And personally, I I love when CEOs have a really clear goal that we're working towards. And all of our clients that work with us for any length of time understand that the benefits extend far beyond whatever that singular goal is, right? Because it's building their personal, professional reputation. It helps them with investors for their company. It helps them with attracting top talent. It helps them close deals. It helps them with so many things, like get appearances on podcasts, podcast sponsorships. One of my clients has like $50,000 in sponsorships for his podcast, not because the people loved his podcast, but because they loved his presence on LinkedIn and his reach. I mean, his podcast is great too, but I'm just saying. So it's such a powerful medium. And actually, I have a really fun stat for you. So last year, people in the United States spent an average of 52 minutes per day on TikTok. But people only spend an average of about 8 minutes per day. And that stat, I think, is a couple years old, but I assume holds true on LinkedIn. So why would someone invest so much in building their presence on LinkedIn opposed to a platform or medium like TikTok? And I think that the answer is really, at first glance, it's like, well, don't build on LinkedIn, build on TikTok, right? But the problem is, or the difference is, especially in the B2B space, is that LinkedIn, and I was just Googling this too, like has no competitors, is the only social platform that's remained relevant for over 20 years. And when you Google like what's an alternative to LinkedIn, I mean, yeah, there are plenty, but there's none. And so it really is, they have such a cool niche right, in this business space. And it is the online resume, the online reference point that anyone will look up before you meet with them, right? And so imagine going, sure, if you go to someone's profile and they've never posted and, you know, they have their experience and whatever, it's like, okay, whatever. Like, you don't think less of them or anything, but imagine going to their profile and having this rich, like, feed of the things that they're thinking about and care about and what they're working on. And, you know, that jumpstarts the conversation when you get to meet with people. It takes you from like going, you know, starting at zero to, okay, I already know 15 things about you, and we can actually jump into the heart of this conversation. So it's a powerful networking tool. Yeah, it just really is so cool.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Just even outside of that, from just a trust, credibility, and just glancing at someone's profile and look, we all judge like it or not, and saying, okay, is this somebody based on their background and who they are and what they've posted that I would like to potentially work with or have a meeting with? Do I want to invest that time? And so obviously curating that presence online has an impact, whether we like it or not, bad or good. When it comes to deliverables, when it comes to impact, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I want to really drill down into somebody decides, gosh, you know, this would be a value. We need to get our CEO greater visibility, or the CEO himself, or the C-suite exec. Let's say CXO in some cases, right? Because it could be chief revenue officer, it could be chief financial officer, whatever. Most of the time it is a CEO. But talk a little bit about things like, we talked about the process, we talked about some of those elements. When it comes to deliverables and impact, map that out a bit for me.
I mean, yeah, so we're producing written, video, image, basically any kind of post that you've ever seen on LinkedIn. Like, we're producing the assets for that. There's a like LinkedIn algorithm report that came out recently by Richard Vanderbloom, and you know, he one of the things that I found especially interesting, right? LinkedIn used to be the text platform, right? There weren't really videos or images on it. It was really just people writing something out and sharing it. Recently, there's been a little bit of a shift, but you know, still text posts tend to get the most reach on LinkedIn. That's how people on LinkedIn have been accustomed to consuming content. And there's almost a little bit of resistance to watching videos sometimes, whereas like, you know, I'm happy to read through this post because I can do it at my speed and I can tell if this is something I want to go deeper on or not. So yeah, it's any format. But the thing that I found interesting is that the text-based posts are actually, they can get the most reach, but they are the hardest thing to do well. Like, there is a deficit of well-written pieces of text-only content on LinkedIn. And it's because it's really hard to do well. It's really hard to blend. It's really hard to make B2B, you know, business stuff interesting sometimes, right? And I think that's what I love about it, is that it's not, this stuff isn't boring. It is interesting. It is relevant. It's just that you have to tell a better story about it. And so, you know, that's, personally, I'm a writer. That's my favorite part of it, is getting like the text piece of it exactly right. And you know, you have 3,000 characters on any given LinkedIn post, and there's all kinds of advice about you know, how long your post should be and what's too long and whatever, but nothing is too long if it's well written and you are actually captivating people's imagination and getting them excited about what you're excited about. And I think, like, you know, you meet with CEOs and with people all the time, and you know, the energy that you feel from them is just palpable. But then, you know, you go to their website or their company blog or whatever, and it's like, God, like, it's like painful to read this, you know? So anyways, so the deliverable is written content. It's sometimes edited videos or like images. It's, you know, anything and everything that people need to hit publish on a post, or sometimes we're doing it on their behalf.
Are you asked about ROI very often?
So I was working on a sales consultancy, and that's actually, you know, that was very much like the hyper focus of everything we did, right? Was like very ROI driven in terms of revenue generated and sales, right? And like, I do get asked about ROI, but I think the people we really love working with, again, appreciate the value. I've never worked with anyone who hasn't generated revenue from their LinkedIn presence ever. And well, at least anyone for more than 3 months. But I think the people that are most successful see that as like a secondary goal, right? And the first goal is to tell a story that connects with people, and the revenue's great and the talent's great and all the other stuff are great, but I try to not make that like the most central focus of what we're doing, because I think that if you get too hyper fixated on like how does this directly translate to blah blah blah, I mean there's all kinds of marketing activities in an organization that are hyper focused on that, and I'm not discrediting that. I think it is vitally important to know if your team's, how the team is performing and whether or not you're making smart investments. But I think that the ROI is so high on what we do, it's almost laughable to me. Like when I think about how much people pay and how much revenue is generated and how much sponsorships are generated or how many partnerships are like, it's almost like so high that I'm just like, yeah, anyways.
No, I understand what you mean. Let me talk about that for just a second because it's important. We both have conversations related to ROI with clients, right? And sometimes ROI is qualitative, okay? You're not able to readily measure it with some sort of dashboard KPI, okay? And I think that's part of what you mean is there a quick Google dashboard or something that you can go to and say, hey, this story generated X amount of impressions. Okay, great. How do you know those people want to work with you? This is a long-term game. It's not going to be one story and you're going to measure its impact and how many people bought your widgets. It is building a reputation over time. And sometimes, like it or not, even though we live in a very data-driven, analytics-driven, KPI-driven world when it comes to digital marketing, those are some conversations that not everyone is prepared to have when you say, hey, look, you've got to look at this from a qualitative standpoint and a quantitative standpoint. I'm not leading with the quantitative for this type of work. I'm leading with the qualitative. So evaluate that first and then work with us for 6 months. I'm speaking for you to a degree. And then you'll be able to see the benefits, right? So they've got to have, they've got to come to the table from not a standpoint of skepticism. If you've got to explain it to them and persuade them, they're probably not the right client to begin with. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I've never hard sold anyone. I have so many meetings where I'm like, I don't think you're ready for, like, I honestly feel like most of my sales calls are me trying to dissuade people because quite frankly, I don't want to work with people who aren't excited inherently about the process of this, because it does take that kind of internal motivation. And, certainly like if someone's working on employer brand, they'll put on their job applications, how did you hear about this opportunity? And we had one client who 100% of the applicants that they ended up interviewing heard about the opportunity through the CEO's LinkedIn profile. And it's things like that where it's like, that's kind of what I mean, where it's just like the ROI is so high. It's like impossibly high that I just like, being like, oh, your ROI is like 100,000%, over 6 months, like almost just feels stupid. So I'm like, it is, but yeah, I want to work with people who are intrinsically motivated to do this, who see the value in it, even if it never generated a penny of revenue, but I know with absolute confidence that it will. And yeah, I'm never trying to convince anyone of anything really.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think our calls must be similar because I spend a lot of time speaking to either marketing teams, CMOs, CEOs, and saying, hey, this may not be the right thing for you. Are you sure you want to do this? Here's some of the negatives, here's some of the positives, and I can tell, within 10 seconds, 20 seconds of a conversation, I can tell that, okay, this is not a good fit for you. There's some, we've got these nice partying gifts on the side. Maybe you're interested in those. There's some consolation prizes, but we're not going to work together, and that is okay because it just, their expectations sometimes are just such a mismatch. And even, I hate to say this because I don't like turning away clients, but if the energy just isn't right, if they're just coming at it from like, hey, what are you going to do for me kind of a standpoint, it's like, dude, nothing. I'm doing nothing for you. It's not a good fit. We're not talking. This is over. But that's just me. I can be very difficult because I take a lot of pride in the work that our team does. We're about 45 people, and you've got to be excited about the client. So, not to ramble on, but I think we're aligned in that regard.
Oh, I just 100% agree. I think that the energy, I mean, it's like pulling teeth. If I'm going to try and have a conversation with this person a few times a month and they're like, don't want to be there, it's just pointless. Like, I only want to work on things that I can do a great job at, and I can't do a great job at it if you're not excited about it.
100%. What do you see for your agency? Do you even call it an agency? What is it? It is
Sure.
what it is. Sure. Okay. Is this something that you want to scale? Do you consider it a lifestyle business? Is this more of a boutique kind of a thing? What are your plans for the year?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I've been grappling with a lot. I founded this company 2 years ago, and at first, speak of, the benefits or dividends that an online presence pay, like I was quite literally fighting clients off. Like I couldn't keep up, and so quickly brought on a couple of people to help. Really, I believe that everyone has a superpower, and most people probably don't even know what their superpower is. And I think that the reason that I am motivated to continue to scale a company is because I want to see more people, be it our employees, our clients, whomever, understanding and leveraging their superpowers in their work, because I think the world would be a better place. We would all be happier, and, work outputs would be so much better. So yeah, I mean, in terms of plans, like I am not trying to like grow super rapidly. I care a lot more about, the one-to-one personal relationships. And obviously that's not super scalable to some extent, but finding and helping people transition out of, we hired a teacher and someone who worked at a nonprofit, and, these like curious, motivated people who can get into the tech space, make a lot more money than they ever thought possible, and leverage more of their skills that make them great is kind of one of my big motivations in general. So, and that's what we try to help our clients focus on and do also.
Do you think it's hard to deliver the same quality of service as you grow, as you bring on more staff? How do you enforce or spread your vision, mission, ethos, and all the little nuances of how you process information from your client onto digital ink or whatever you want to call it? How do you share that so that the folks that you work with not only espouse those values, but can actually deliver the same quality of work?
Yeah, well, you tell me. I don't know. I'm certainly still figuring it out, but I think it starts with, especially, I'm at a startup and I have experience hiring people at other people's startups, but it definitely starts with hiring the right people, especially the first handful of hires are so important that they, you know, kind of naturally embody a lot of those things. And it's really cool. Like I have a couple of employees one in particular, who now has been working with a client for a year and a half, like completely managing it. And, they haven't churned, right? Which to me is like the strongest indication that they have mirrored, right? Certainly we're tracking their LinkedIn performance and all the other things, but like, the fact that someone is able to autonomously manage a client relationship and their brand, and they want to stick around for a year and a half, that's a pretty strong indication that we're doing something right.
Agreed. I mean, there's something that you said earlier that somebody could say is cheesy or sappy, but I agree with it, and I'll tell you why. And this is not a bad thing. So, you talked a little bit about sharing their story, making an impact, showing the world that, these are people who are doing some good. They have a superpower. And I'll tell you something as to why I think we're in similar businesses. So I remember when I was working here at a building in downtown Chicago, and I would walk to work, and I would see people getting off the train, walking to their jobs, and they seemed absolutely miserable. And I just kept thinking to myself, and I wasn't like I was having a blast. I'd started, a tech company. We were growing. It was like I was, living my best life during. I mean, that would change as we sort of grew and had growing pains and all that stuff. But I was really tuned in to folks that weren't doing well, getting off the train, going to work in the morning at 8 a.m. And I thought, gosh, when and online, you just see that's articles about the same people. You see your Elon Musk, your Mark Zuckerberg, whoever the CEO of the time is. And I thought, gosh, there's all these people filing into work, leaving it all in the field, you know, giving it their best, and they're just not getting the level of recognition in some cases they deserve. And there has to be an outlet for them. There has to be a platform where we can highlight all the great work that they do, because at the end of the day they're the ones that are contributing to the economy. And they're like, I don't mean to, again, I it's so easy to make this sound cheesy or sappy, but they're really like the unsung heroes because they toil every single day to drive things forward, and without them stuff would stop. So does that make sense? Do you agree with that? Am I being too cheesy? What are your thoughts?
No, I love that. I think I worked for the mayor's office briefly. The biggest lesson I took away from working in government, and I think it's a good lesson for that should be applied or that more people should think about in more contexts, is that it's not enough to do great work. And I think I was naively under the impression my whole life leading up to that point, right, that it was enough to do great work, that if you really put all of yourself into your work, your heart and soul into it, you did the best possible thing. Like you created the best possible outcomes and product, that everybody would just flock to it. They would see that it's the best and they would just know. That's not the case. It's not enough to do great work. You also have to talk about it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it's super important to not only do great work and put in the work, but advocate for yourself. And in the context of the corporate world, like it's important for employees, it's important for CEOs, it's important for everyone. It's not enough to do great work. You also have to talk about it.
Mhm. There's a fine line between shameless self-promotion that is frankly tacky looking in appearance, and confidently, in a understated way, showcasing your capabilities in a way that you're sharing it with people and letting them know that you're a resource. How do you balance those two? Do you think it's a fine line, or do you think it's not a fine line? Because I see people on LinkedIn and I'm like, gosh, how do I not have him or her in my feed? Like, this is just way over the top, you
I'm
know.
so glad you asked that because yes, I've been working posts for the last few days. Like so many people think that posting on LinkedIn is cringy, and I get it, right? Like I get seeing these people and being like, because I feel it all the time too. I'm like, I don't want to be the person who's like, I need to sign one client this month and like blah 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 blah. Like it comes off as desperate and needy. And one rule of thumb that we follow is that we try not, like, for every 10 posts that a client does, only one of them should have an ask associated with it. And an ask might be listen to my podcast, or, check out our website, or sign up for my course, or whatever. So only 10% of the content that's going out should have an ask associated with it. And the remainder of it is really just focused on the behind the scenes narrative that get people to buy into what you're building without you needing to tell them to buy it, because people get it. Like, so we're focused on the like the meat and potatoes of, this is what we're building. This is my motivation for building this. This is the drive for this. This is why I came up with, or how I came up with the idea and why I'm committed to building the best possible company. And it's like sharing just, like the heart and soul of the company through the leader's eyes without being like, buy my product, buy my product, buy my product. Because like, who wants to, like, God, like, leave me alone, dude, right? Like, mute.
100%.
No one wants that. We're focused on industry insights. And like, another thing I'll do before meetings is like, I'll just literally go into Google News and like search for any like recent news articles and like, what's your perspective on this new policy? Or like, why do you think that this is happening? Or, sharing the behind the scenes thinking that goes into making decisions about an organization more so than focusing on the end product or what we're selling.
Yep. What are 3 tips that you can give to somebody who is considering amplifying their online presence or maybe their LinkedIn presence more specifically?
Stop stressing so much about having the perfect profile. It's so much, no one's going to your profile. So I always encourage people to start getting content out there, finding their voice and their kind of theme of what they want to talk about before worrying about your profile. Like, yes, ideally your profile is all like buttoned up and perfect, but I think that that's it's almost the last piece of the puzzle to me. The more important thing is putting something out that's being pushed to the top of people's feed every day, right? So that would be the first thing. The second thing, if people are trying to do this on their own, right? If you're a small business owner, what I have always done personally, I just write out over the course of the week, write questions you get asked by employees, customers, during new business meetings, whatever, jot down the questions you get asked and maybe like a bullet point or 2 on your response, but then go on a walk and answer, either do video, but really you just need to like an audio note and answer the questions verbally, just like you're doing in those meetings. Or if your meetings are recorded, you can just go pull the transcript directly and take the transcript of you talking about it and use that as a starting point for developing a piece of content, because it makes it so much easier and you're more likely to talk about it in a human way than you would ever write about it in a human way. So you just have this great starting point for a piece of content. Obviously, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with ChatGPT and building like a custom ChatGPT that will allow you to, input a bunch of transcripts and a bunch of stuff and can kind of help you along in this process. But don't rely too heavily on that. Like, I would also say quality over quantity 100% for LinkedIn. LinkedIn is not a numbers game. This is not about posting every day or 5 times a day. Please don't post 5 times a day. Like, I would rather see CEOs put out one really thoughtful piece of content per month or per week than try and like, really stack it and like do something every day, because that becomes meaningless. Yeah, I mean, I think those are a few things, and focus on what you're telling, how would you describe this to your spouse, to your kid? Like, how would you tell them what you're working on at work? And think about that kind of language and that kind of approach to putting out content. Please, dear God, stop sharing your company posts. It's just clutter and noise. It's not helping you or your company. There's a much better way to do it.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Very last question. Is there a book that you've read recently that you would recommend to others?
So many, based on what we've talked about today. Certainly the best book that is, if you want to get started on building your online presence, Founder Brand by Dave Gerhardt is 100% must read. Quite frankly, I read it just kind of recently, but when I read it, I was like, yes, yes, yes. Dave Gerhardt helped build a startup, I think, to acquisition, and he did it by building his CEO's online presence, and he kind of documents that journey and what that looks like. So it's a great resource for people getting started. I'm reading right now How to Know a Person by David Brooks, and it's a little less, well, I would argue it's maybe more important than any business book you'll ever read, but it's great because it's how do we see people and be seen and have conversations with people without lumping them into these, you know, oh, you're a Democrat or you're a whatever. Like, you know, how do we see past the labels that we ascribe to people, and really have real conversations with people? I love that. I could go on and on. I love books. I read a lot.
Your preview image on Zoom is of you reading a book.
Yeah, I think it's actually founder brand. Yeah.
It is. Gosh, I could talk to you for hours and hours. It's so refreshing. And so, I appreciate the perspective that you bring to growing an online presence, building your brand, and some of these things. So, folks, Mackenzie Hazen, Dais Media out of Denver, Colorado, works with C-level executives to elevate their brand, elevate their online presence, manage their reputation. Mackenzie, thank you so, so much. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for your fun. It was great.